Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pathways to Family Wellness podcast. My name is Dr. Brendan Reardon. I'm a pediatric and family chiropractor. And joining me today is John Ohm, the managing editor of Pathways to Family Wellness magazine. John, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much again. Great to continue this conversation.
Of course, we're doing a part two. As we were doing our German New Medicine talking about different biological systems a few weeks ago, we realized that we had so much content and it'd be better to break it into two parts. And so what we'll do today is do a little overview of some of the things we went over on that first day, and then we'll jump into what the work looks like in German New Medicine. So I'm wondering, just to pick up basically right where we left off, if we're able to jump in and just talk a little bit about the German New Medicine work and some of the ways that they may understand biology that might be different or deviation from how we traditionally have been taught to understand how the body works.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said last time, German New Medicine is a big discovery of the brain and the nervous system. And to summarize it, what we talked about last time, what we're really talking about are what are called biological conflict shocks, which are acute, unexpected, and emotionally distressing experiences. And these experiences impact the brain visibly, controlling a specific brain relay. And you'll see this on a CT scan. And then from there, an organ will begin to adapt, and a specific germ layer of that organ will begin to adapt at the cellular level to galvanize a response to that conflict shock. And we have specific kinds of conflict shocks in life that impact specific parts of the brain, governing different organs of the body. And symptoms of disease, they all fit into this new phenomenon where you have this conflict active stress adaptation phase. You might experience symptoms in this conflict active phase, or in the majority of cases, you'll experience the onset of symptoms after the stress is over, after the conflict resolves. Then you get this post-conflict healing inflammatory phase where the organ begins to reverse those previous cellular adaptations in a kind of fluid environment. The brain shifts from this concentric ring formation to an edema, and you'll see that on the scan, and it just indicates that you've transitioned into this vagotonic post-conflict healing phase. And so much of biology is revealed by this discovery of these implicit, innate biological adaptations whose source is in our experiences of life. So that's essentially what we're talking about. And there's all kinds of examples where, depending on the organ, you have different predictable sequences of events of either cell ulceration in the tissue of the organ or cell multiplication in the tissue of the organ during that conflict stress adaptation phase. And then following the conflict, you have the healing phase where the restoration occurs, where the ulcerated tissue begins to be replenished, or the previously added cells that were serving a function become broken down or start to get broken down. And we discussed how germs are involved in that process of restoring the organ and the tissue back to normal tone.
Yes.
So it recontextualizes our understanding of biology on a big level, involving the psyche and experiences at last in a scientific, empirical way, but it also recontextualizes our understanding of organic diseases, which are diseases that are distinct from poisonings, injuries, or starvations. It's if you can rule poisoning out, it's like acute poisoning events that would cause inflammatory symptoms of the body, then what you're really dealing with are these biological programs which really explain the phenomenon of the symptom specific to the organ and the cellular adaptation that had preceded.
And these are the degenerative type of issues that are the vast majority of things that are such a healthcare burden on the world that we're speaking of, right? Or the ways that we understand things. When we're talking about injuries, it might be an acute injury like someone falling down a flight of steps and breaking a leg or something, right? So we would almost rule that something like that out, or someone accidentally ingesting poison or things of that nature.
And
more like the chronic degenerative things that seem to afflict so many people.
Yeah, exactly. Chronic diseases, that is such a burden.
But I guess it could also show up as more of a, if we're talking about some of the germs being involved, as an acute inflammatory response as a part of that as well.
Well, yes, the germs are now understood to participate in the healing phase of these biological programs. Now, that's not to say that no germ activity can be outside of this context. If a germ a specific type of bacteria invades another germ layer or another part of the body where they don't belong due to injury or some puncture or something happens, a perforation, then you can have germs in another part of the body, and that can be a problem. Okay, but what we're really discovering here is that germs are participating in the healing phases of these biological programs, and they have a normal, natural, and predictable participation. We can, we understand now what their activity is. They were there in the body prior to any of this happening, so they were just sitting in the microbiome, essentially, not causing a problem, and then it's these biological programs that activate them to participate. Chronic diseases. This is the challenge of our time, is to understand diseases where we can rule out acute poisoning and rule out injury. What's the cause of these? And we've had so many theories over the years of causes, and all in truth, the majority of our theories really kind of fit into this pathogenic model that really is just a great semblance to the poisoning idea. So one insight I had a little while ago was that we experienced poisoning events early on in history, and we understood the cause, poisonous plant or venomous animal, that causes a breakdown process in the body. But then people would get sick where you could rule out they didn't eat anything bad, they weren't around any animals, but yet they're discovering, or they're exhibiting symptoms, inflammatory symptoms. We just made the assumption at that early time in history that it must be something poisonous. And what happened there is we entered into this realm of, pointing and declaring and just calling anything poisonous that strikes our fancy. And so we've been living in that model even up to the present day. That's the poison. That's the evil, malevolent entity or force that breached our body and caused a poison-like breakdown in the system, in the organs, causing this inflammatory process. And what the German New Medicine is showing us is that no, it's a new phenomenon to understand these organic diseases. It's not a poison-like event. It's not a pathogen. It's not a malevolent force or entity in our environment or within us that's causing a breakdown in the body. These symptoms fit within the context of a biological program of adaptation to life experiences.
And that makes a lot of sense and it's more empowering as well, and also having a lot of responsibility, because what we're saying with that is that instead of looking at it as like these outside forces are happening to us, these are things that are happening within us or we are working through together. So it's not that with the poisoning that is something outside the body happening to us, but with the things that you're describing through these new biological systems, it's a wisdom, it's a dance that's happening within the body, and they're all intelligent adaptations.
That's right. Yeah, there's an intelligent adaptation, and then the consequence of these adaptations are these, for the most part, inflammatory healing phases that have to reverse the adaptation. We've just interpreted these inflammatory healing phases after the conflict in life is resolved. We've just interpreted the onset of those symptoms as, oh, something infected us at that moment.
Yes.
And that wasn't right. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can talk about a few examples and what the work itself might look like in terms of the, even with German New Medicine, the work is, like if I'm the one working through the issue, the work is for me to do, but perhaps there'd be someone who would help us to understand the work or be a detective of the work. I'm wondering if we can just talk about the practitioner-patient relationship, or however that's described, right? That's maybe we can put some different terminology to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is self-work in the end. The adage that the only one that can heal you is yourself. That's very true here. But when we're living our lives and we're in the thick of our lives, it can be hard to understand and to make the connections. We're kind of in the woods. We can't see the forest for the trees kind of thing. So a practitioner from the outside, somebody who can see in on your story, will be able to see a clearer picture and help you identify and ask the right questions to unveil what it was in life that conflicted you. And that's really, in essence, what the German New Medicine work is all about, is first identifying the symptom, which organ and germ layer it's affecting, which will tell you what kind of biological conflict shock you would have experienced prior to then. And then, so that's a huge map, a huge benefit to get us started. And then we're going and looking for those moments in time when that shock impacted us. So yeah, the practitioner is hugely helpful to, and with a comprehensive knowledge of these biological programs and the various organs of the body and what to expect, whether symptoms in a given organ is conflict active symptoms or whether the symptoms are post-conflict healing symptoms. Where, like I said over and over, the majority of our common ailments are post-conflict healing symptoms. So you have a symptom, you identify what the symptom is, what organ it's affecting, and then if it's a post-conflict healing symptom of that organ, a predictable consequence of the previous cellular adaptation, you have this question, this key question, which is, what happened just prior to the onset of the symptoms that fits this narrative of a resolution to a conflict? And with the map, you can get precise. We're looking for a precise kind of conflict. So if it was the urinary tract, like we talked about last time, we're looking for a boundary demarcation conflict that existed in your life, causing a cellular adaptation to proceed, no symptoms in this case, during the adaptation. But then you resolve that conflict, and that's when the symptoms of inflammation, urinary tract infection, because bacteria are participating in the process. It's once you resolve that conflict, that's when the symptoms show up.
Yes.
And so that gives you a clue. You could say, well, just before my symptoms showed up, that guy in my life that was, really crossing my boundaries, and that's a good way to describe it because that's how it felt, and it would feel that way because that's the part of the body that would affect. And he left, or he was gone, or I resolved that issue with him, and that's when the symptoms first began. And so that gives you a clue. That's an obvious one there. It's like, okay, the resolution is boom, crystal clear, and now we know what the problem in life was. So we were talking about chronic diseases last time, and that is essentially what that means is that the healing symptoms, which, in the majority of cases, you get healing symptoms, and then a few weeks later, they're gone, or even a few days later, they're gone, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Yeah. But when they become chronic, what it means is that the brain relay and the organ adaptation is being triggered by environmental stimuli, which we call tracks in the German New Medicine. These are environmental or experiential stimuli that are reminding our organism and our nervous system of that onsetting conflict shock moment, which again, it must have been a surprising, unexpected, emotionally distressing event. And these tracks really relate back to that event. At that event, they could either be environmental stimuli like smells can be tracks, but also thoughts and feelings can be tracks. Yes. And whatever the track is, it was present at that moment of shock when the initiation happened of this biological program of adaptation. So in the person's case with the boy who was crossing the boundaries, well, the shock would have been when he first crossed that boundary. So maybe you were in a relationship with him and didn't expect anything. He thought he was a good guy. Then all of a sudden he becomes aggressive, or he's invading the boundary in a way that you're not okay with. And that would have been the shock. And so that's where we want to go to, is that moment that you were first shocked in relation to this specific conflict, so that we can begin to comprehend the problem in life, or the stressor.
Yeah, I was going to say, and these are, I've got a few questions or comments, I guess, that to go back just a little bit. These are the things that become, so for example, our body's healing itself all the time, right? Regardless of whether we're aware of the healing process or not, the healing process is taking place. And so there's a lot of these conflicts are resolved on their own without awareness, correct? But it sounds That's like right. What you're talking about is the ones that keep these recurring themes, or these ones that keep showing up over and over again, or it seems like these chronic issues that our body isn't getting over. Because the healing process is always it. We're just privy to observing it as humans. We can observe the healing process at work, but it's always happening. The body's always healing itself. So it sounds like what you're describing with the work is these issues that become more chronic, that are not resolving on their own.
Yes, that's where the work can really shine. But in a deeper sense, I would say in any symptomatic case, it's very important to identify what the cause is, and this experience in life. So yeah, in the case of chronic conditions, you've tried everything, but the urinary infection is still there, the symptom, whatever organ of the body is still there. You're gonna then look to other things, and then you're gonna find German new medicine potentially, and then realize, oh my God, this has to do with my life experiences.
Yes.
And then the pieces start to fit. And sometimes just awareness of that and the conflict in life and when it began is enough to alleviate the brain and the nervous system to say, it's almost like the brain and the nervous system go, okay, you understand me. You understand that I'm really hung up on this. Now you're on board. It's kind of like a child. I like to personify these programs and these brain organ relays. They're distressed about something, and you, the parent, the collective of all these biological relays in the brain, can give attention to one of them and say, okay, what is it exactly for your case? What are you hung up on causing this specific organ adaptation and the symptoms? And so whether it's a chronic disease that you're been dealing with for months or years, or whether it's an acute disease, it can be so important. It is so important to identify in life what it was the root cause of that.
Yeah.
Because it elevates us out of the fear of the symptom. And then it gives us this new sense of control over, okay, if the cause is in my environment and this problem in life, I can work to resolve that in real terms, make sure that it is resolved if we're dealing with post-conflict resolution healing phase symptoms.
Yes.
You can now make sure that, okay, let's make sure this conflict is resolved, and I bring my conscious awareness to it. And then obviously in the case of pre-resolution conflict active symptoms, so for instance, cellular growth in the alimentary canal, a tumor of some sort, you really want to identify the cause and address that in real terms. And then when you address it and solve it in real terms, get the issue put to bed, and fix it in real life, the tumor will stop growing. The cell multiplication will stop. And that's the beauty of this work. I mean, we've understood this in medicine, that tumors would stop growing, but we never understood why, And here we're understanding why. It's because when you resolve the conflict, that cell multiplication which was a conflict active response, will stop. The program will turn off in the brain. The inner child that's running that program, that inner relay system, is no longer stressed out because the problem is resolved. Yeah. And then everything changes after that. So in all cases, not just chronic symptoms, it can be highly important to identify the cause of the biological program. Yeah.
Oh, agreed. And in the case of, because in this case, the symptoms are an intelligent adaptation, but the symptoms can also be damaging to the body. Yes. Mm-hmm. So as they continue, as the healing process continues to unfold, if it's left unchecked, right, in the case of the tumor will continue to grow, impinge upon other tissues, perhaps metastasize somewhere else, and then, can certainly become a real problem.
Yeah. Well. Okay. So about the idea of metastasis. So. That's why the German medicine becomes all this so important here, because previously we understood, or the idea in medicine is that the primary tumor, let's say it's in the large intestine, is growing, and oftentimes you don't even notice the growth, unless you get a scan and they identify it at that point in time. But you don't get symptoms during the growth phase. It's actually in the post-conflict healing phase when the tissues start to get broken down that you start to feel this bloating. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have mucus discharge, or maybe there's blood in the discharge. And then, of course, you're going to go, okay, I need to check this out. They say, oh, there's a tumor in your body. Mm-hmm. And that experience for a lot of people can be an additional conflict shock, especially if the doctor is panicked himself about the symptom. And he comes to the patient with panic and he says, I'm really freaked out. You have a tumor in your large intestine. We have to do something quick, otherwise you could die. Okay, so this experience in the patient's psyche most certainly is a conflict shock. And in particular, there's several kinds of ways the brain can interpret that conflict shock. A very common one that we experience is we experience it as a death fright conflict shock, and that gasp reflex, needing air. You need this air morsel all of a sudden, because the death fright is this acute conflict, this acute threat in your existence. And so what happens is that experience imprints in the brainstem, governing the relay which governs the alveoli cells of the lungs, okay, to increase the oxygen intake in response to this death fright. And so that will imprint, the biological program will start running, causing multiplication in the alveoli cells. And weeks later, they'll take another scan and let's say it's metastasized from the colon up through the bloodstream, and boom, into the alveoli cells. It's again, this idea that the cause of the disease is this evil or malevolent force or entity, either in our environment or within us, that is just causing dysfunction and breakdown in the body. That old idea of that's rooted in our sense of poisoning. It must be the explanation for all of these things. We've just applied that here, and we say, oh, the poisoning or the malevolent entity is these tumor cancer cells, and they can just metastasize and cause destruction in other parts of the body. But here we're understanding that no, the individual suffered another biological conflict shock, and the adaptation is these cellular growths in this other part of the body.
Now, what would, for the resolution of that type of a conflict shock and the awareness, would that typically revolve around the person who's experiencing that, understanding that this doesn't have to be a death sentence, there's actually other possibilities, my body has the ability to heal itself, basically choosing not to buy into whatever's said to them, understanding that there is a real physiologic change, right? There's changes to my lung tissue happening in that case, but that it doesn't have to be the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. The more situated you are in the German of medicine, the more you're going to have a natural scientific comprehension of the phenomenon. Yeah. And with that, you get a reduction in fear in all phenomenon. If you don't understand the phenomenon, you're going to be afraid of it. But in this case, once you begin to understand the phenomenon and fully integrate the reality of these biological programs, then you innately are not going to respond to such things with such fear. That's why I'm very big on getting this out into the culture, because it shifts so much of our understanding of biology and these symptoms. Yeah. But in that case, in this day and age, what we really want to do for that individual is help them identify not only that the cause of the alveoli cell growth is a death fright conflict, which is most likely when they experience that diagnosis or prognosis of you have 3 months to live kind of thing, but to also identify within the German medicine context, what was the cause of the tumor in the large intestine, the primary tumor that is the first, the major thing that you're dealing with, and to bring resolve to that. You try to address all the symptoms in the body from a German medicine point of view, but this primary colon tumor, that's going to be a very important one to address in the psyche of the individual, to bring a comprehension to everything else that's going on in their body. It really stems from this. And continuing that work, it's a challenge for a lot of people to bring them out of the fear paradigm, which has this cultural authority behind it. That's really what I've understood, is that it's the cultural authority behind our understanding of disease that really is our bane in our own health and wellness. And
major belief patterns that become implicit in the way we look at things. It's so understood that this is just the way that things are, right? And so people just take that on, and it becomes very difficult to question that or to stand out, because there's so much external force reinforcing that belief pattern.
That's right. Yeah, and especially the fact that external factor is it comes from a doctor, a prestigious doctor. They have all the science, they have all the knowledge, and when they tell you you are in danger, you're going to believe that. Or if you're, it's like it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have 6 months to live, and that just so registers in the organism, because this very authoritative individual is telling you your doom, essentially. And this kind of goes into one of the reasons why I believe Hammer was so vastly successful in in his work with cancer patients, because he was a medical doctor at the time, and he had this knowledge, this breadth of knowledge, and this air of authority backing him. And so here's this large man who comes in and talks to the patient, and he's understanding the symptoms in a completely new context, understanding it within the context of these biological programs and the life story of the individual. And he sits with them, and he can just that alone can give such a relief to the panic that the individual is experiencing.
They can hold that kind of space, and presence is very powerful.
That's right.
Which can work both ways, right? Because there's, like you were saying, there's just as much air and authority from the physician in the other way, who maybe isn't afraid themselves, but has so much authority with, like, this is the prognosis, and this is the diagnosis, and this is the treatment, or else you will die. That's
yeah, exactly. We called it in medicine the placebo and the nocebo effect. Yes. I always harp on that, in the sense that once we discover the placebo effect, and then later the nocebo effect, which really describes these phenomena even pre-German New Medicine, a doctor can, like you were saying earlier before the call, a doctor can say to a patient, "You have cancer," right? And that patient will freak out, and then it's later discovered that they never had a cancer. It was a misdiagnosis, but nevertheless, the individual was shocked and then developed cancer. The nocebo effect, right? Just from the fear. And now we understand scientifically why exactly and where exactly that individual developed their cancer. It could have been in the alveoli as a result of a death fright. Could have been in other parts of the body if the individual interpreted that shock in a different way, leading to a different brain imprint, leading to a different biological program. So the nocebo effect is a very real thing. We all recognize it. Same with the placebo effect. And when these two things were discovered, it's a shame that medical science didn't really shift at that moment and say, okay, we need to recontextualize and re-understand our understanding of biology.
The healing power of the mind. Instead, the placebo, unfortunately, I feel like is looked at as like, oh, we're trying to get rid of placebo because this is a bad thing, or this is not scientific, or this is like, you're trying to flush that out. And it's almost looked at like it's like an annoyance or something not to be, right? Like when like clinical research, it's like an annoyance. Like, we got to rule that out.
It is annoying for them. It's annoying because it goes against the entire construct of their biomechanical understanding of disease symptoms, being it must be a breakdown and something must be causing it as in a kind of entity, a pathogen of some sort, or some malevolent force or entity. And so that's their paradigm. And then this is totally shifting their paradigm. And so they don't like it. They don't know how to understand it either. How do you understand it? Yeah, we're talking about the psyche. That's woo-woo,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's certainly not something that can be patented and controlled either. But
right, exactly. There you go. There you go.
But I would encourage our readers to check out the book. There's something called a book called The Holographic Universe. I believe it's Michael Talbot that wrote that. For me, I remember reading that probably over 15 years ago in chiropractic school. And it talked about case after case of these incredible spontaneous remissions or healings that have happened. And we do hear some of these stories so often about these incredible cases of spontaneous remission. And those need to be researched more, because I bet what you're going to find is that at a certain point, it wasn't that like nothing happened, but the people that have had those spontaneous remissions, I've heard some of them share their stories, and at a certain point it's almost like in their mind they drew a line in the sand and they said, this is not going to be the end of me in some way. And that's not to say for people that do succumb to certain things that there was like a mental weakness there or anything like that, because I feel like we're on really careful ground here with something like that, because I want to make a point to make sure that we're not trying to place blame or anything like that, but for the folks that have had incredible remissions, there was almost like some type of a shift that happened internally within their psyche and then physiology that was able to be a very powerful force in the healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the German New Medicine is so powerful, because it takes what otherwise would be this sort of mystery, and it brings it into an empirical science. And so, like I was saying earlier, the cells are growing in the alimentary canal. That would be an indigestible morsel or an indigestible anger conflict, where something we can't digest. The cells start to grow. And in our last episode, we were talking about how the purpose of the multiplied cells is to produce more digestive enzymes to break down the morsel. In the animal kingdom, it's almost always a literal morsel. But for us as humans, it can be more figurative. Like a car can be a morsel, money can be a morsel, a promotion or an inheritance can be in a morsel. And when you can't digest it for whatever reason, it's taken away, you can develop this kind of program in an archaic sense, responding to this indigestible morsel. And it often in humans involves this anger element as well. But the cells multiply, and they'll stop multiplying when you resolve that conflict. The brain imprint in the brainstem will turn to edema simultaneously, and the cells will stop growing. Okay, and then you can have this process of cell breakdown with the help of mycobacteria, tubercular bacteria, ancient fungi, bacteria, to break down this cellular multiplication. And then within weeks, you could have it go away. And so that would be called spontaneous remission in the previous paradigm. We don't know how to understand it, but now we can look at that case and we can identify, that inheritance that they were unable to get actually came through and they got it. Yeah. Or in other sense, they let go of it at last. They're like, I don't even care about it anymore. Yeah. And in another way, resolve that conflict. Yeah. Or something else came into their life that was more important. And they said, okay, I actually prefer this over that. And so it resolves that previous conflict. So we now have a scientific way of understanding spontaneous remission, as well as, the nocebo effect. Both of which have been in this realm of mystery and woo-woo and medicine, biomechanical medicine. Just I don't know how to understand that. And once you do understand that, with the help of these biological programs, this new discovery of the nervous system and the brain and how it integrates with your psyche and your experience, oh my God! Now you have an overarching context to understand the phenomenon of biology and the disease symptoms. So, we kind of did this last time where we're just going I get so excited about how this breaks us out of the paradigm, and I just want to talk about that all the time. But it's a whole new paradigm, and with respect to the work, the biggest question that comes up is, like, I'll be talking to somebody, they'll have a symptom, and we'll identify that, it's this conflict in life, and they'll see, oh my God, yeah, I did resolve that kind of conflict prior to the symptoms showing up. And then immediately the question is, what do I do about it? Yeah. What do I do about it? And that's where we're at, and this is where we can start to begin to understand the mind-body connection. And what we find in the German New Medicine is that what we want to do is the way I describe it now is appeal or appease and give harmony to the biological relay that was reacting to the conflict in life. And again, it reacted on a moment with that shock, that unexpected distress. Yes. So what we really want to do is empathize with that part of our being. I mean, I really see it as like a personification. It's a part of our being, a being within us, really. And it had this shock in life. It was
on autopilot for the most part, right? There wasn't like a period of event happening and shock. It was all like you snapped your fingers, right? So it was all this, almost an instant phenomenon and imprinting.
Yeah, exactly. It was an imprint in our nervous system as a result of this unexpected distress that caught us on the wrong foot or by surprise. And what we want to do is we want to bring our conscious awareness, kind of the parent of our biology, we want to bring it to that event. We want to bring it to that moment of shock so that we can begin to really empathize with this part of our being, this relay controlling the organ. And that can be so powerful to give resolve to the brain and organ that might still be on a defensive pattern relative to that conflict shock. So bringing our awareness to say, I see you, I recognize you, I recognize how you, I'm referring to the organ and the relay, I recognize exactly where you experienced that shock. And I now have my attention there. That's a major part of the work, is identifying what was it in your life that caused that shock, or yes, that resulted in that shock. When was that shock moment? Okay, that's a huge part. And then what we want to do is go even deeper. Okay, we want to understand why the nervous system of this individual was particularly on guard and particularly primed to have such a shock.
Why was that particular event a trigger, or why did that particular event imprint on that person? Whereas
that's right.
That same event the same event that might imprint on me may not imprint on you. It sounds like that's what we're delineating. Right?
Exactly, because we all have a unique fingerprint in our brain and nervous system, which means from gestation to early childhood, we've had experiences in life that prime our nervous system to be a little bit more on guard to these things, but to not care about these things. Whereas in another individual, it's completely reversed. And these things will be very upsetting, but these things won't be a problem. And so what we want to understand, going deeper than the first conflict shock, is what were the earlier experiences in life and they are experiences, moments in time, that really took us by surprise and primed our nervous system to be on guard and attentive to these kinds of issues, these kinds of conflicts in life. And that brings us further back, and bringing our conscious awareness to that. It's like the child in our brain and organ is like, you really understand me. Oh yes, because that is, and it's conscious of that. We're the ones that have to bring our parental consciousness to it. Yeah. And I love the parent-child analogy here, because it personifies what otherwise might be a machine-like understanding of the body. No, it's a living, it's life, and it's so much like a parent-child relationship. A child can be really upset about something, and you can say, be happy, and the child's like, screw you, So telling our brain to be happy can be similar, right? So it's not just about saying, oh, you were conflicted, don't be conflicted. Yeah. The child in you, just like a child in your life, they want you to understand and empathize with exactly what was going wrong.
You got to match the tone.
Yes.
Is not matching the tone. It's interesting as you're describing that. I'm thinking of a lot of Bruce Lipton's work as well. I know we were fortunate enough to have him on the podcast a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. So I would encourage our listeners to check out that one about a year and a half ago. I think March or April of 2022. And he speaks so much about the first preconception and then the first several years to 7-ish years of childhood being so important because of the priming of the nervous system that happens with that, which then is going to set us up to replay certain patterns throughout our life. And it's fascinating how many adults or people we'll talk to in the practice, and I feel like as adults, so many of us are trying to recapture something we feel like we lost when we were in early childhood because of some kind of an imprint that did or didn't happen. And there's these like patterns that are playing out in our lives in terms of the circumstances of our lives and the things that we tend to get affected by. But it sounds like a lot of it, even with the German New Medicine work, is having that awareness of like when, what, why, and how were those early things affecting and imprinting on us, and is it still serving today? Right. That's the.
Yeah, absolutely. And the notion about patterns. I mean, we know this in a very real sense. Like, why do I keep attracting the same person into my life in a relationship? It does. It fits perfectly into this. We do live on patterns. We repeat ourselves over and over. And it's these repetitious patterns of conflict shock that imprint in the brain and then cause a biological response instead of just an emotional response, right?
And that's where, sorry, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's where the separation of how we like to separate things as people. So we like to think that the mind is different from the body, is different from the things that we try to separate things as if these two are separate, and they're really not. And so we almost think, and especially in the way we understand a lot of conventional medicine, it's like, oh, issues of the mind, you want to see a practitioner that works with the mind. Issues of the body, you see a practitioner that works with the body, and never the two shall meet, right? And it's it's not really that simple.
Exactly. Psychology and biology, they need to be unified. I kind of harped on this last time too, is in a very real sense, we can't understand the phenomenon of these disease symptoms, these organic diseases ruling out acute poisoning or injury. We can't understand this phenomenon until we integrate the other half of biology, which is psychology, which is our psyche and our experiences and our emotional experiences. It makes so much sense after the fact, realizing it with the understanding of all of these discoveries that lead to this predictive understanding of the organ adaptation and the symptoms, all tying to the psyche's experience of shock. Of course, we couldn't understand biological phenomena. We've been kind of superstitious about these phenomena in a fear mode in the largest, and for so many thousands of years, and up until the present day, it's this taboo. Disease is a taboo. It's like, wash your hands, do this thing, do that thing. Just be clear of the evil that is in you, and it's just been on and on and on.
And all of these models have given us a portion of the picture that have been, in its best, we've had things that have been useful have come out of it, of course, right? So like, the idea that maybe we should wash our hands, or physicians should wash their hands after they're done doing an autopsy before they deliver a baby, like that's important, And well, the physician that came up with that, Semmelweis, was ridiculed when he first suggested that notion to his colleagues in the late 1800s. They were like, that's ridiculous. And, and women continued to die in childbirth, and it was terrible. But that understanding didn't give us the whole picture, right? So it's easy to take something too far.
Yeah, I've had conversations about the German medicine, and they would bring up that topic. It's like, wait, no, germs do cause disease. It's not psyche, brain, organ. That's not the paradigm. The paradigm simply is germs. How do you explain something like Semmelweis and the washing of hands, reducing the incidence of puerperal fever and other diseases in delivering mothers? And I had to kind of take a step back and say, wait a minute, let's rethink this. Something so basic and universally accepted on both sides, terrain theory and germ theory, in a sense. They love that story. But I once you learn the German medicine, you realize, well, germs don't just become pathogenic. They are directed from the nervous system to serve these organ-specific purposes. So was it the germ infecting the mother that was really the phenomenon here? Is that something that we've proven or can prove? Or is it just this association that, well, at that time, doctors started to wash their hands? But what else happened during that time? As I try to think about this, during that time, you had a shift in childbirth from pretty archaic practices, things such as breaking the pelvic bone to get the child to birth. Traumatic traumas on the mother in an obstetrical model of a bygone era. And that shifted during this pivotal time in history as well. We didn't do that as much anymore. We started to be a little bit more cognizant of natural childbirth. And then perhaps it was the trauma of childbirth that really is the incident cause of fever and disease symptoms, just as we understand it within the German medicine context today. And over that period of time, the trauma reduced.
Right. And in that example as well, I feel like we could unpack this for a bit. I mean, certainly in that state, and moms are very vulnerable in the delivery time as well. So things are going to have imprint quite a bit stronger than normally would. So if we're kind of working with that same train of thought, right? So there's a lot more vulnerability, a lot more openness. Nervous system is open. Psyche is much more open to positive and negative forces at that point. So yeah, it's interesting. Maybe we'll have to unpack this a little bit more in terms of what that, because there might be a complexity to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It deserves reopening that question. All of germ theory really deserves scrutiny and reopening our fundamental tenets. It was one thing to scrutinize germ theory previous to German new medicine, because you could scrutinize the studies that might have confirmed or you can scrutinize the studies that are basing our understanding of germs being the cause of disease and say, well, actually, you haven't really established that so well. But the question is, well, then how do you explain the phenomenon of disease? And in the absence of that knowledge, we'll just stick to our previous ideas. Yeah. But here we're having a real alternative hypothesis. It stands on its own. It holds water. It leads to a predictable comprehension of the phenomenon of, say, an infection, a bacterial infection in the urinary tract or in this part of the body, because the nervous system is now understood to direct the bacteria in the healing phase of a biological program. So this is the alternative hypothesis that now gives us a ground to stand on as we start to reconsider our understanding of bacteria and, in a broader sense, the cause of disease symptoms. It's a new horizon, really. It's exciting. It really is.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking of, with this example as well, right? Sometimes the way I'm understanding German New Medicine is sometimes we think of it as a conscious accepting of things, but there's certainly the cultural pressures, there's cultural norms that play into that, there's the priming that we experienced when we were children that play into that. With an example of a delivering woman, there's the openness and the vulnerability of the whole nervous system and the entire psyche at that point. So there's things that are going to imprint stronger then that might not normally imprint as well in a different state, right? Less, if we're looking at it from a germ theory model, less resistance at that point, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Just to recap the what is called the first biological law of the German New Medicine, which again is just stating that the conflict shock it has several criteria. It's unexpected, emotionally distressing, isolating. Okay. But the key is it takes us by surprise. This is to distinguish it from stress in a general sense. If you can predict the stress before it happens, if it's a normal, predictable kind of thing in life, it's not going to become a biological conflict. It's not going to imprint the brain, causing these archaic biological programs. And that's very important to keep in mind, because it's not just a general sense of stress or even the openness of the nervous system or the compromised position of a nervous system. If you can anticipate the stressor, then that's going to defend from a biological conflict shock. One of the ways to understand a biological conflict shock, there's two ways that I've done in the past, which is we can understand it from the polyvagal understanding of the nervous system, which shows that there's like layers to the nervous system. You have the social nervous system, responsible for interacting with people, and then you have the emotional nervous system, the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system, and then the parasympathetic freeze nervous system or shutdown nervous system. Well, a biological conflict shock seems to supersede all three of those. It's isolating. That's one of the criteria, because our social nervous system can't deal with it. Yes. We don't know who to react with, who can help us. Nobody can help me. It's a conflict for me, right? And so it supersedes our social nervous system. It supersedes our emotional sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. That's why it's emotionally distressing, okay? Particularly. And then it impacts at the parasympathetic level, kind of superseding our freeze response. And that's why it's a unexpected shock, okay? So these experiences of it being unexpected, emotionally distressing, and isolating in a social sense is because it's really overpowering or exceeding our nervous system's normal, natural way of dealing with stress.
The experience itself, and then the body will go into a more sympathetic response and then a parasympathetic healing response.
Right, and then you can understand the conflict active cellular response or the adaptation phase as the continued activity of the sympathetic nervous system. Yes. But here now it's governing an innate biological program, whereas most stresses won't. But this stress superseded our capacities, and therefore we're going to galvanize a deeper response of these biological programs. And then, of course, in the healing phase, that sympathetic response, that emotional intensity dissolves, and then you have this parasympathetic or vagatonic, relaxed healing phase, and that's where the repair begins. Yes. Understanding the nervous system and how a conflict shock really is defined is very important in the German New Medicine, so that we don't just go ahead and say, oh, this is it. No, it has to be a shock. And these are acute. They describe it as like a bolt of lightning, it really takes you by surprise. Boom. Okay. These are the kinds of things that will impact in the brain as a concentric lesion, causing a biological program. I really love the language in Salutogenesis and Aaron Antonovsky of I think I got his name right, but comprehensibility. Well, he's talking about the sense of coherence. And he's understanding that's the framework of understanding why people are healthy. They have a great sense of coherence. And it's these three factors within that, which is comprehensibility, manageability, and the ability to derive positive meaning from the experiences of stress. Okay, when you have
eustress versus distress.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I describe a biological conflict shock is that it's a moment when we don't comprehend it. It's beyond our comprehension. So incomprehensibility. We don't know how to manage it. So it's, it was an unexpected event. We don't know how to manage it, and it's a conflict now. And we can't derive positive meaning from it. We're just all negative about it because, again, it superseded our comprehensibility. Yeah. So I love that language because that gives you another clue and insight into how these biological conflict shocks really, what they are, how we experience them, and why they result in these special biological programs of nature. Yeah, they're in the full term, Hammer called them significant biological special programs of nature. And you can just, you can dive into that.
A few times in Pathways, and I was like, wait, it's one of those mind twisters, like, what are we? And then, thankfully the articles in there unpacked. This is where to reference as well, the spring 2023, this recent spring edition had several articles about German new medicine. And we're having to read over that one a couple of times. Yeah,
it's a new language, but it's also very enticing language. A significant biological special program. It's almost indicating that these are special programs, but maybe they're not the only programs that nature has at its disposal. These are special programs, and of course they're special because they explain now in a predictive way the consequence of these symptoms that are interrelated into the program's cellular adaptation. They're special programs. But it goes to this bigger idea of like, even the holographic universe book, that maybe we are programs, not in a matrix sense. I never liked the matrix analogy of like we're in a machine world plugged in, but in a holistic sense or in an organic sense, a simulation of our own design, like a dream. I think ancient people called it a dream, but in any case, consciousness and these programs of nature kind of explaining the phenomenon of life, and the mysteries of life. I think it's a good context for understanding even this big picture of reality that we live in. And oftentimes the conversation will go to these big notions of, well, what is reality in the end? Why do we die? What is life? All these big questions. It's really galvanizing a new enlightenment. I'm just so blown away by the power of these insights of the nervous system and these biological programs to really break us into a new way of understanding a lot of stuff.
Something I really like about it is it puts us in the driver's seat as well, I think, which is really important. And it's just another way of understanding depth in terms of us in the driver's seat. If we look at a history of how things happen, there's a lot of history about things happening to us, and so this puts us more in the driver's seat of like, okay, there's a empowerment that can happen here. There's an awareness. We have the ability to make conscious changes, to understand things on a deeper level, and to have incredible healing phenomena happen in our life through some of that understanding.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And that's self-autonomy, and we had this in a kind of spiritual sense. We are controllers of our life, and now we're just realizing in a scientific sense how very true that is. It is our psyche. It is our reaction to our experiences in life and our life story. It's us. It's our psyche. That's what imprints the brain. That's what controls the organ, and it does say, the power is in your hands. It's in your being. It's not, you're not a subject or a victim to your environment or your life. Nature isn't pathogenic or malignant, and nature doesn't make mistakes, and your genetics made a mistake or something like this. It's all this psyche, brain, organ, programs, and you're the driver. You're in control of this. It's a breakthrough, really.
Perfect. I feel like we could have another episode now. Let's talk about paradigms.
It does, for sure.
We'll have to schedule another one, but I just wanted to wrap things up now if we could. I know we covered a lot of different ground again, which is great. I hope we've tied things together. I feel like my mind's spinning a little bit because I'm trying to for me, this is a very interesting way because it's another way of expanding how things work and understanding things. So I know my own mind is twisting and turning right now with this. So I'm coming to grips with it, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, or any like loose ends you feel like we need to tie up.
Yeah, no, I just want to recap. The German New Medicine work is it is very specific, and there's a lot to it in the sense of understanding these patterns in people and asking the right questions to be able to get to that original conflict shock, what the brain and the organ want you to do. The biological consciousness, or the innate intelligence, it wants you to become conscious of these moments that are affecting this part of our body. And to get to that moment, and then what happens once we do that, we relieve the nervous system in that unique way, giving comprehension to the shock. And first, now we understand it, and now we understand the deeper origins of how our nervous system was primed at an early age, like 1 to 7. We're bringing context and comprehension to what otherwise is affecting the brain and the organs. So I tried to be very general about the German medicine work, but yeah, it's an interpersonal conversation of investigating together. And the real power of this work and of the German New Medicine in a large sense is the cultural shift it will have, so that our culture, instead of freaking us out over our disease symptoms, will come together in support of the individual's conflict or life challenge. Yeah. So a doctor is really somebody who's there to bring you from a state of fear and difficulty into a state of love and comprehension. And if our doctors could start doing that for the individual, and then our culture could come around an individual who is ill, with a disease, we can bring the resources, bring the humanity to that individual and help them address their life challenge. And it can be a long life challenge that they had to deal with. It shifts our humanity from separate the sick individual into a corridor. No, do the exact opposite. Come around him, bring the community to him, and understand in a collective sense with all of us there what exactly it was your brain and nervous system responding to in life, and how can we be of service to help you comprehend it and empathize with you. Yes. Over this specific issue. And now the individual at all levels is being recognized and seen on a very deep personal level. Yeah. And that is just the, health. Okay. And culture will change. Our society will change with this knowledge. And the impact that will have on outcomes and health outcomes, it's going to be profound. So thank you again for having this conversation.
I love that vision, John. I love it. Let's do it.
Great. Let us do it. Yes,
all right.
Please.
Talk to you next time.
Thank you.